one way. The route starts, if you see my cursor here, on the border of the South Spitsbergen National Park, where it goes south to the southernmost point of Spitsbergen, Sørneset, before we turn up and go north to the northernmost point of Legenhuken. The reason for us going south and then north again is that the southern Spitsbergen is a national park, so driving a snowmobile in a national park is not allowed, and therefore we cannot be dropped off further south. The whole trip starts at home. For me, it started in Oslo. You're never too old to get help from your mom and dad, and traveling to Svalbard with 230 kilograms of food and equipment, it was definitely too much for me to carry alone. So I got some help checking everything in at Oslo Lufthavn Gardermoen. Arriving at Svalbard in late March is very beautiful. You have a lot of colors, and it was very cold and clear, and had been cold for a very long time when we arrived. This year it has been more sea ice than for the past 15-16 years, which is good for polar bears, good for skiing, and good for other animals as well, relying on the ice. We spent the first 2, 3, 4 days in Longyearbyen packing, all of the guests packing their own equipment and their own gear, making sure that everybody has the right things in terms of their personal equipment and enough food for themselves. Different participants of different height and different weight needs a different amount of food and different equipment. It's very personal, so it's very important to have enough time for everybody to make sure that all of the preparations is according to plan, and that everybody has enough for the expedition itself. After a few days of packing, we were ready to start, and on the 25th of March, we took about 3-hour snowmobile ride to Sørneset. You'll see down in the left corner, there is a map that shows the snowmobile route. And in the next slides, this map will show where the different photos are taken. The snowmobile ride was very smooth, took 3-4 hours, and we arrived at our starting point at around 12. However, the sun sets goes down behind the mountains quite early in late March. So we only skied for 2-3 hours before we put camp. The reason for this is that we didn't want it to be extremely cold. Reaching the first camp, we still wanted to have some sun for people to organize and do a little bit of faffing and fixing their equipment in the polkas. This is our first camp on Nattårsbreen in beautiful clear skies. Temperature in the first evening was about 24.5 degrees below zero, dropping during the night. So it was a cold start to the expedition. From Nattårsbreen, we skied up. Nattårsbreen surged. It moved quite a long distance 14-15 years ago, and if you look at old photos, it looks quite unskiable, but it has been melting since, and it's now very flat and very smooth and very beautiful for skiing. If you see my cursor again, we're heading up to this glacier pass here. Nattårsbreen is very long, and it takes about 2 days to ski the entire glacier, surrounded by beautiful mountains. From Nattårsbreen, go down Slakbreen, and we approach one of the trickier places on the route, the Hornbreen. Southern Spitsbergen is actually an island connected to the rest of Spitsbergen by a small glacier passage. Passage that gets thinner and thinner every year. So crossing it every year can be a challenge. However, we had good conditions, clear skies, good visibility, and over 1.5 meters of snow in the middle of the passage, making our crossing very easy. We also had sea ice on both sides, so that if it would have not been possible, we would have been able to cross Hornbreen on the ice. This is another photo of the area right before Hornbreen. Crossing Hornbreen, we skied up Sykorabreen, down Slakbreen, and we get to Isbukta, one of the other places in the South Spitsbergen where we need to be lucky with the weather. The Isbukta, or the Ice Bay, is a place where we need to cross on the sea ice, so we need sea ice conditions. They were, however, very good, and we managed to ski down on the ice right in front of the glacier you see here on the photo. The crossing itself on the sea ice was quite fast. It took us a few hours, and it was nice to get down on the ice. Earlier this year, in February or March, there has been a big low pressure in the south of Spitsbergen, and raining as far south as this photo has been taken. So it was tricky ski conditions with a layer of ice on top of soft snow. A layer of ice just not strong enough to carry the weight of us and our pulkas, so that we were constantly falling through the ice and had to plow our way through deep snow. We had, however, plenty of time, and we rotate skiing in front to relieve some of the pressure and weight. We also had to, on this day this photo was taken, to ease the weight of the front pulka, so that the person skiing in front had a lighter pulka, and the heaviest pulka was the person skiing in back, because it was so much easier with the already prepared tracks to ski in. Crossing Isbukta, we're heading up on the Sørkappfonna, the Southern Cape Glacier Plateau, which is a long uphill. And as we skied further and further south, it was clear by the conditions that this low pressure that created rain was heavier and warmer further south. So the ice that I mentioned in the last slide became thicker and thicker and harder. And up on the South Cape Plateau, the ice was so thick that the conditions turned to the better, making skiing quite easy. However, with the extreme cold temperatures, we still had 25 to 27 degrees below zero, made the snow very sticky. To put it in a way some of you might understand, it feels like pulling a pulka through sand. Not that any of you have done that before, but maybe you can imagine what it feels like. On day 7, we got down to the sea ice down by the southern coast of Spitsbergen. There are very rarely ice down here, but we were quite lucky having ice as far as the eye can see. So the photo of us standing here, we are actually standing on water. There is water underneath the sea ice you see here. In the distance, these bits of ice you see is glacier ice or sea ice that has been drifting and churned up from pressure ridges and moving currents. We reached the southern tip on day 7, and then the trip starts. It's time for us to turn north, ski with the sun in our back and normally the wind in our face, to reach Felegenuke. The reason we start in the south is because there is over 2 degrees different between the southern tip and the northern tip. So weather will be much warmer in the south. And we were also protected by mountains in case of strong winds. Starting in the north would give us the The pro would be skiing with the sun in the face and wind in the back. But it would be very, very much colder for the first 2 weeks. So cold that everything becomes very, very hard in terms of routines, and especially for the first days. Going back up, we still had the beautiful weather. On this trip, I can probably count on one hand the amount of days we had with cloud the entire day. So we had a lot of good weather, especially in the south, which is nice. We get to enjoy the beautiful mountains and the beautiful scenery. Now that we have turned north, we also get to ski in our own ski tracks, which makes going north very much easier, both in terms of navigation, but also in terms of pulling the polkas, as the tracks has hardened and makes the polkas glide very much easier. So here we are down on Sikurabreen, right before we enter Hornbreen again. Crossing Hornbreen from east to west or west to east seems like something polar bears do. I've seen tracks on Hornbreen from east to west or west to east both times I've been here. So you make sure to camp quite far up on the glacier to be far away from where any polar bears might wander or might stay. So we put camp approximately where these skiers are standing now, with a beautiful view of Sikurabreen in the background. We did have some weather. What you see here is what we call whiteout, which is weather where it's extremely hard to differentiate the horizon. So looking straight down and looking straight up looks exactly the same. Some describes it as being inside a ping pong ball. And navigating when weather like this is very challenging. It's hard to see because the ice can't fix at any point. A lot of people actually feel sick, and I've even experienced some people vomiting after skiing in conditions like this. But by taking our time and not having a mandatory turn in front, we help each other, and those who manage better in conditions like this will take the front. We had weather like this for 1 hour, and it was actually not a true whiteout. We had the mountain to look out in the distance, and it cleared up after a bit, and we got a beautiful sun and a little bit of snow in the evening as we were putting camp. Skiing further north, we reached the point where we started. We ski through the valleys next to Nattorsbreen and up to Sysselmesterbreen. And at the top of Sysselmesterbreen is our resupply. So on our way down, when we drove the snowmobiles, we stopped on the top of the glacier pass and we dug down food for 18 days. Food that we dug about 1 meter deep in the snow. We start with food for 15 days, and we ski south and we ski back up and we pick up food for 18 days and do the rest of the trip. This is to ease our load and make the first 14 days a little bit lighter and better for ourselves. Also skiing up Sysselmesterbreen, which is a very steep hill, 600 meters of elevation in just a few kilometers, would be very heavy with full polkas. So it was a nice surprise to get to the top of the glacier, pick up our resupply, and ski down towards Van Mayenfjorden. Down at Van Mayenfjorden, we saw our second polar bear footprints, the footprints of a mother and 2 cubs that had probably just exited a den and were heading out to the sea ice. We did see something yellow in the distance, but it would be impossible for us, even with the binoculars, to say exactly if it was the polar bears or not. And we didn't want to go closer to investigate. So we continued our way, and the the polar bear there. Through Kjellströmdalen, we had a little bit of wind, but beautiful conditions still. And it's nice this halfway to be down in the valley where it's warmer weather and beautiful mountains to look at. The route has a lot of uphills and downhills. Here we are next to a glacier meltwater pond, which collect these huge icebergs. Beautiful place for a lunch. This is on Ulvebren, the Wolf Glacier, and we're heading up towards Nordmannsfonna. It's a lot of incline, but we chose the route we did to stay a little bit away from the most trafficked snowmobile tracks and instead ski 100 more elevation meters to be in the snowmobile track for 40 kilometers less. Up on the biggest glacier plateaus, Flinsnirfonna and Lomonossoffonna, we had the beautiful weather. Here you see one of the participants skiing. This photo is taken at about 1,100 meters of altitude with great weather. It's also now in the middle of the trip. It's starting to be a little bit warmer, with temperatures ranging between 15 to 25 degrees below zero, both day and night. Truly beautiful places to have good visibility, as you are on top of glacier plateaus with the views both to the east and to the west. This is our camp at Lomonossoffonna. We are here at the highest glacier plateau on Svalbard, 1,200 meters above sea level, and a truly beautiful place to put camp. This was also the last day where the sun set below the horizon. So we got some very beautiful colors late in the evening. It was few of us that went out to look at the colors, but those who did were grateful. After the glacier plateau, we skied next to Newtontoppen, the highest mountain on Svalbard. And the plan was to summit Newtontoppen if we had enough days. However, the weather forecast didn't allow it. It was forecasted bad weather in the distance, and we decided to go on and ski some kilometers to make sure that we would still manage to reach Åsgårdsfonna if bad weather hits. This is taken from down Veteranen, one of the longest, most beautiful glaciers on Svalbard. We skied for 2 days in a slow downhill with beautiful conditions. We also were visited here by the police, the field inspectors from Sysselmann, who drive around to make sure that everybody follows the laws and that everybody have their papers in order. It was definitely for the guests a weird experience, but it's nice that Sysselmesteren maintain law and order up here on Svalbard. At the bottom of Veteranen, we had quite a bad weather forecast for quite a long time. But we decided when we woke up and we saw that the weather was nice to take on one of the toughest challenges on the trip, the glacier called Trinity Hole. It's 750 meters elevation gain in 10 kilometers, and it turns towards the south. So wind was forecasted from the south, but when we woke up, we had nice weather, and we managed to ski up the entire glacier before the wind hit, where we turned north again and had the wind in our back. So we were very lucky managing to get up to Trinity Hole with good conditions before we got some wind. Up here in Åsgårdsfonna, we had quite some wind for a few days. This was a day where it was wind okay enough for us to ski in, but as we started skiing, it quickly deteriorated, and we only skied one leg of about 4 kilometers before we decided to put camp and spend some time digging walls and preparing for strong winds ahead. We were stuck in a storm in Åsgårdsfonna for 2 days. prevailing winds between 25 and 32 meters per second. Hurricane winds for those who use the Beaufort scale. We had good tents. We had the double 11 millimeter tent poles, which are much thicker than normal tent poles used in winter expedition tents, and also a lot of guidelines. We did experience that the wind was shifting halfway on the second day, and it buried 2 of the tents in about a meter of snow, threatening to break some of the poles. But a little bit of digging with the 3 shovels cleared the tents, and we managed to stay for the rest of the wind with no further issues. Once the wind settled, we dug out the tents and we moved camp 50 meters. That was just to get the tents out of the snow and for us to have a little bit less digging the next day. Further north, we got a little bit of clouds. The dark clouds you see here are reflecting of the open water in the north. So we realized that the wind from the south had taken the sea ice and blown it away. It did, however, provide a nice contrast and good conditions for skiing. We skied down Tåbreen, which is the northern equivalent of Trinity Hall, about a 650 meter downhill. Beautiful conditions and nice weather for us to ski in. And at the bottom in Mosseldalen, we were so lucky to experience what you see here in the photo, which is 2 male ptarmigans landing right outside the camp and fighting over territory. Why they did it there, I don't know, but they were so close they actually flew under the tripwire and were just 1 or 2 meters from us fighting for territory. Once in a lifetime experience, I'm sure. This was also our second to last camp before the final, the second to last final leg. We skied out Mosseldalen along Polheim-Flya, and then we camped 10 kilometers from Verlegenuken, so that we on the 25th would have an easy day skiing north. And on the 25th, we reached Verlegenuken, which is this orange square. You can see it from far away, and we had a beautiful day of skiing, plus degrees, a little bit of cloud, and the sun coming out now and then, and almost no wind. It was actually so warm that the 3 ladies decided to swim in the ocean, making them some of the extreme few who have been swimming 80 degrees latitude in April. I was standing polar bear guards, and 2 other guys were spare polar bear guards. So unfortunately, all 6 of us couldn't swim in the ocean. Very much credit to the ladies who did. On the 26th, we had a snowmobile ride back to town. The ride took us 9 to 10 hours. Conditions were both good and not so good, but in general, the ride was fast, and we had good weather, warm weather, and we all really enjoyed it. Fantastic way to see the landscape we have been skiing through and recognizing old camps and old places. A little bit about the expedition preparation. Preparing for an expedition like this has a lot to do with working out. And there's 3 categories I'd like to talk a little bit more about: flexibility and strength, technique, and pulling a tire. A lot of people there with normal jobs, they don't have all evening, every day, and the weekdays to spend hour upon hour pulling a car tire. And in terms of what you gain per hour of workout, normal strength exercises in the gym is the most effective. You get to work on specific parts of your body, legs, torso, and arms, which really helps in long skiing expeditions. It's not only the legs that we need to work on, but shoulder, neck, back, stomach, arms, hips are all very, very important pieces of having a successful expedition. Flexibility and is also very, very important to be able to move, have long strides, and balance. It's good. It's important to have balance in the downhill and in big sastrugi, so that you don't fall over and hurt an arm or a leg, and that you can manage downhills well. That's especially important on Svalbard, where there is a lot of uphill and downhill. Technique is also very important. If you have a good skiing technique, a good cross-country technique, the amount of energy you use moving over a vast distance is less than if your technique is not as good. By practicing cross-country skiing without the pulka, without anything heavy, you'll get the stride, which will help you further on. And then the most common way, the closest you can mimic pulling a pulka is pulling a tire. The tire pulling works a little bit different depending on the ground you're pulling on. Tarmac is much heavier than gravel, for example. And the tire pulling should be done in quite long sessions, minimum 1.5 to 2 hours, and it should be quite heavy and slow. By pulling a tire, you do mimic the motion of the pulka, and you can feel which muscles you're using, and you also get to use your arms with the poles. So by using the car pulling the tires, you'll more easily you can find out what muscle groups you should practice with flexibility and technique in the gym, for example. I live in the second biggest city in the Czech Republic. I must say, if you're not from Norway, tire pulling can raise some eyebrows. My tires have been attacked by dogs with the owners scratching their head and wondering what I'm doing. But I have my tires locked to a tree in the forest, about half an hour bicycle ride from my home, so that I get a nice workout riding my bike. And I can pull my tires in the forest where there's normally not a lot of people and ride back. I said that tire pulling should be done in long, when you do pull the tire, it should be done over a long period of time, a few hours at least. So it's a great thing to do in weekends, practicing flexibility and strength during the weekdays, tire pulling during the weekends. If you manage during a winter to go to Norway or the Alps or anywhere else where you can practice some cross-country technique, that's great. It is, however, with working out, as with a lot of different things, anything is better than nothing. So if you don't live a place where it's snow in the winter, and you live in the middle of the city, and getting to a place where you can pull your tire is difficult, cycling, running, yoga, and normal working out, climbing, are all fantastic ways to work out for an expedition. I do, however, have guests that are pulling tires in the middle of London. I pull tires in the Czech Republic. So by just trying to ignore different fun expressions on people's faces, you'll be able to mimic the working out. It's working out. It's always a balance between too much and too little. Working out too much, if you're not very used to it, can strain your body too much, and you'll end up getting hurt before the expedition starts. But as a saying, between 5 and 10 hours a week is a good workout for an Arctic expedition. It depends on the expedition, of course. Some are tougher and some are a little bit easier. Equipment and routine. It's important to have the right equipment for an expedition. However, it doesn't need to cost very much. When I give out equipment lists, what I say and what I want you to take is that this equipment list is never a requirement, they're a guide. So the first question that I ask myself when I need something new equipment-wise is what works for me. And I try to find out what works for me and note that on the paper or get the list of what I need and then find the equipment that matches that. If you see my cursor here, I have tried a lot of different face masks in neoprene and decided that I had to make my own. I need a mask that covers my nose, but that doesn't cover my mouth. And it was nowhere to be found, so I made my own face mask from an old buff. And working like that, you'll get equipment that works for you. The most expensive is not always the best for you. I also ask myself the question, what can I do without, or what one thing serves multiple purpose, instead of asking the question, what might I need? An insulated Primaloft jacket, for example, will serve as both a sweater and a wind jacket, and an extra down thin. It can also do the job of a thin down jacket. Then it's important to distinguish between luxury and comfort, because we are on a trip for 30 days and we need to sleep well and we need to be comfortable. We need to rest well and have a nice trip. If we don't sleep and rest well, then the trip might be destroyed. So on some things like sleeping bag, sleeping mat, down jackets, and warm clothing, one should never save weight or money. You should buy what you think you need so that you have as a nicer trip as possible. A luxury, however, you don't really need. It's only 30 days. So there are many luxuries you can do without. You do not need a new pair of underwear every day. I use the same wool shirt for 33 days now. Not this one. It's this one is new, and I changed my boxer shorts once during the trip. Taking care of the equipment during the trip is also very important. In this photo, you see one of the guests putting her sleeping bag on top of her pulka to dry it out. By getting to know your gear, you'll easier get an understanding of what works for you. You don't need a lot of experience in the Arctic testing all your gear in cold weather condition, but it's if you in your mind go on an expedition sitting at home, planning your days and going through your routines, you'll easier work out what works for you. Putting you on your big mittens and trying to access your snack, for example, you might find out that this doesn't work. I can't open the bag or I can't drink some water. And then that's something you need to change. It's also very important to notice that some equipment, luxuries, and comfort, there are some luxuries that can be a little bit comfort related. I, for example, have started to bring heat pads, which is an extremely easy way during the night if you're cold. Rip open a heat pad, shake it a little bit, and throw it down into the sleeping bag. It works very, very well with a hot water bottle as well, if you're cold. But it's one of those things that it can be nice to have. The routines is also very important. When I wake up in the morning, I really don't want to step out of the sleeping bag until I'm ready to go out of the tent. So I eat my breakfast in my sleeping bag. I lay in my sleeping bag while working the stove. And then about 40-50 minutes before we're leaving the tent, I take the stove inside the tent, which is a chapter for itself. You need a lot of ventilation. You need both people to be aware of what they're doing. You need to be safe in the environment. The stove should be burning by maximum pressure, and needs to be very careful having the stove in the tent. But staying warm, especially when it's colder than 25 degrees below zero when you're dressing, and not being cold on your toes and fingers when you're exiting the tent, can help quite a lot on the comfort. So by staying in the tent as long as possible, and then when you walk out, pack down the tent and do this as effectively as possible, it prevents time being outside in the cold for too long. I also recommend in cold weather, especially when it's wind, for people to go to the toilet inside the vestibule before you go outside, as it will often prevent frostbite on the hips and thighs if you can sit inside somewhere sheltered from the wind compared to sitting outside in the wind chill every day. The days on Svalbard and the days of expeditions are often put out in different legs. One leg is the time you're skiing. On Svalbard, we skied for 50 minutes and had a 10-minute break. And our days were normally 7 legs or 8 legs with a lunch break in the middle. During these legs, it's very important that your routines are there so that you have everything you need easily available. Food, drink, and warm gear. And that's gear to put outside your shell layer. A down shorts, down vest, a down jacket, and big mittens and face mask. So that if it gets cold, you can put things on top. If it gets too warm, you can ventilate by opening up ventilation in jackets and pants. I'll go a little bit back and talk a little bit more. I forgot when we are skiing, we are rotating who's skiing in front and navigating. Everybody does their part. Halfway we eat lunch, more legs, and then we get to the tent in the evening. Comes to the evening routines. I like to have one tent bag of about 50 to 60 liters, which contains everything I will need until the next morning. So that I don't have to, when I get into the tent in the evening, I don't have to go out of the tent again until the next morning. So in this tent bag is my pee bottle, coffee cup, a little bit of extra gear that I might need during the evening, but not all of my extra clothes. And I put one breakfast, one lunch, one dinner, and one snack bag in my bag in the evening, chuck it in the tent, and then I can get in and I'll be inside my sleeping bag from 5, 6 o'clock in the evening until the next morning where we start to ski. Also in the evening, when all the water is boiled, I like to prepare a hot water bottle for everybody if it's very cold. And I also like to put boiling water in a few thermoses. That's because if it's very cold, you can take the hot water bottle when it gets cold, chuck the water out in the kettle, and refill it with boiling water from a thermos to make sure that the toes and hips stays warm in the sleeping bag. Having a proper Nalgene bottle as a hot water bottle is probably the best thing that has happened to a lot of people on Arctic expeditions. I think it's the #1 tip and trick you'll hear on all expeditions. Food and drink. It's very important on expeditions that the food that you're having is not something completely different to what you're used to. You're not changing your calorie intake. You're eating more of what you're normally eating. When we are on these expeditions, you are normally pushing your body harder than it has sometimes ever been pushed before, and fueling that body on chocolate and chips, I don't think it's a great idea. Chocolate is fast calories, but the diet should always also contain nuts, dried fruit, cheese, salami, and the regular dinner and breakfasts, with not a huge amount of oil and butter, as the body has regulates how much oil and fat it will take in, and if your body can only take 25 grams of fat and you plan on bringing 50 on an expedition, most likely the last 30 grams will just go straight through without any of the calories being taken up in your system. Everybody before Rosteil guiding expeditions talk a little bit about what they like and what they don't like. If you have any allergies, or if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, we plan so that you get enough calories and food that suits your requirements. Normal on a trip like this, we calculate about 4,900 calories per person per day, which is enough to sustain a weight or to maybe lose a kilogram or two, but not enough for anybody to drastically lose weight. Smaller people a little bit less, tall and big people a little bit more. But everybody makes their breakfast themselves with powdered milk or coconut powder, krusli, oats, sugar raisins. Snacks consist of many different nuts, fruit, cheese, as I said, huge variety. During lunch on this expedition, we had half of our lunches were noodles and the other half were mashed potatoes and soup. And we made sure that there were so many different varieties of noodles that nobody ate the same noodle twice, which maybe sound a little bit silly when you hear it. But on a trip like this, where you're out for so long, it was fantastic every time when you got to lunch and you got to open a pack of noodles, and it was a brand new taste. Very, very fun experience for all of us. For dinner, we eat real turmat, dry tech, and we take the ones with the most amount of calories. And we repack the dinner, so that means that we take the dinner out of the pouch. We take everything out of the packaging to reduce the amount of garbage and to make it easier and lighter for ourselves. Actually, on a long expedition like this, if everybody takes their real turmat, their dry tech out of the pouch, it saves about 7.5 kilograms on the food. So that's what you see here. We're repackaging, and that's what takes the most time in Longyearbyen. Making 33 breakfasts with the 50 grams of this and 20 grams of that takes a lot of time. And adding and mixing chocolate, nuts, fruit, hot chocolate, coffee, it's a time-consuming job. But it's something that when everybody does it, it gives them responsibility of their own food, and you get better ownership of the expedition you're doing. As I said, food is very important. Food and calories, that's not a luxury, that's a comfort, and we need good food. We need a big variety. Expeditions now, with all of the food and all of the new technology of preserving food that we have now, we don't need to do what they did in the 90s, where they ate the same thing for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 40 days. We can have a big variety, and by using that variety, it will be a nicer expedition for everybody. On this trip, we had such a big variety for dinners that nobody ate the same dinner more than twice, which is very, very nice for morale. And it's nice for everybody to get a little bit different nutritional values from fish, vegetarian options, or options with meat or chicken. So some of you might ask if this is something for me. Maybe you have been on some smaller trips before, or maybe you have not been on any expeditions before. And I can tell you that with the right attitude and the right preparations, an expedition in the Arctic, whether it be a Greenland crossing, even an Antarctic expedition, or here on Svalbard, almost everybody can do an expedition like this. Might feel like you're biting and that you're chewing over a little bit more than you can. But this is not the trips for ultramarathon runners. It's the slow and steady skiing, and by preparing the right way and doing all you can before the trip starts in terms of working out, testing your gear, and talking to your guide and being helped where you can. Successfully having a trip like this is no problem. It's all about attitude, getting into the right mentality, and attacking the problems with a smile instead of trying to find the problems everywhere. And whether it takes 1 year or 2 years, might take longer for some than others, but the long expeditions is definitely something achievable for almost everybody. So
I have some questions in the chat now that I will read to you, Morten. So first question is, how do you defend against bear digging up your food cache?
So the first line of defense against the bear is where we place the cache. The polar bear, Ursus maritimus, they hunt seal, so they will be by the sea ice. So putting the cache far, far away from the sea ice, high up on the glacier plateau, where there's really no food for the bear and no reason for the bear to be, it protects the cache. Also, we dig it deep into the snow, and we don't dig down stuff like meat. All of the sausage, for example, we take with us, so that the snow will protect a little bit from the smells. Distance from the ice will protect. And also what we did was that we covered the cache with a little bit of snow, and then we put some chili pepper on top, and then more snow. But if a polar bear would come, dig a little bit and smell, it would hopefully smell the chili and have a little bit unpleasant experience, and then think maybe this is enough, I don't need to dig anymore. There was, however, no polar bears up at the cache, and I've heard of very few instances where polar bears have dug up caches that far away from the sea ice.
Okay, and next one is how do you mark your resupply spot? Just mark it on the GPS and put any long stick there. Also, how deep would you say you have to dig for it to be reliably safe?
So it will never be 100% safe, no matter how much you do. There's a lot of different things that people do to try to make it safe. What we did, we put it in the bags, we dug it about 1 meter deep, and we marked it both on the GPS and on the GPS apps on the phone. And we also marked it with a tent pole that we put a piece of fabric to, sort of as a flag, so that we would see it when we skied.
Okay. Which tripwire system do you use? Did you establish any redundancy to the system, polar bear guard or similar?
So again, the most important thing to prevent any polar bears is the route choice. We try always to be as far away from polar bear territory, i.e. sea ice, as possible. If we are on sea ice, we always ski for at least 5 kilometers before we put camp. If we put camp close to sea ice, we will have a wake polar bear guard. So far away from any ice, far away from any tracks, and with the wind direction, depends a little bit how far away we will get. So I used a tripwire called NM4, old military tripwire, and I always test the tripwire. It's in 2 heights, so one height is a little bit below the knee, and one height a little bit below the hip. In the 4 corners around the camp, with the poles also extending the tripwire on all sides. The line I use is a fish line, fire line with a breaking force of 80 kilograms, stretched tight around camp. Camp is also put out so that wind is always coming in one direction, with the tents being side to side. Below the tents is the pulkas, and below the pulkas we go to the toilet. So any polar bear that would approach camp would normally come with the wind in its face. So the first thing the polar bear would want to check out is our toilet. Then it would move to our pulkas, and then to our tents. But the most important thing in my experience is where you camp and where you choose to ski, to avoid terrain where the polar bears stay.
Next question is, how did you have the pulka rigged up to the harness?
So we use a rope tracer from the harness. We have a single lock carabiner, about 0.5 meter of rope, and then some bungee to make it a little bit nicer for the back. If you just use the rope, it strains a lot on the back when the pulka stops in Sastrugi, for example. 0.5 meter of rope, a little bit of bungee, a few meters of rope, and then a screw gate or a double lock carabiner. Especially in the downhills and in Sastrugi on Svalbard, the rope on the pulka often goes underneath and gets stuck underneath the pulka. And then when you pull it, it often loses the single lock carabiner attached to it. So we use a double lock carabiner attached to the pulka, a total length about 2 meters of rope, and some bungee.
And how did you fit 2 poles in the Barents tent? I have the Finse 3 with the original poles. Did you use a different set of poles? And which model of the Barents tent do you have?
Yeah, so we had the Finse 4, and I can tell you it was very tight. So what we did was that we used single poles for most of the trip, and we had spare poles with us. Strong winds, especially on Svalbard, they come in low pressures, which means also often the warmer weather. When it's 25 degrees below zero, fitting two poles, it's close to impossible, I would say. But when there is low pressure, 0 degrees, and the tent fabric becomes softer, putting in double poles was not a problem. I do, however, probably going to contact Barents Outdoor and see if it's possible to widen the tent pole channels a little bit.
And how did you manage the power supply? Small battery bank with the solar panel? Question mark.
Yeah. So the power bank I use has 10,000 milliampere hours, 10,000 mAh, and the solar panel I'm using is a 15-watt solar panel, and that was enough for all of the emergency equipment and all of my personal equipment, listening to music and podcasts during the day, maybe watching a movie or a TV series in the evening. I use Anker solar panels and the power banks. I find that the same brand bank and panel works best together. And in terms of weight and price and efficiency, Anker works very, very well.
What type of vapor barrier system did you find best for your boots?
So in Norway, we have Vinmonopolet, small plastic bags from the Wine Monopoly shop, which fits perfect, and which is what I'm using. I always bring extra. Two of the guests, they had RAB vapor barriers, and they lasted for 3 days until they were destroyed. And then they got extra bags from Vinmonopolet from me. So proper plastic bags from regular shops is what I have found works the best. There is, however, a lot of shops now that uses quite biodegradable bags, and that will not work very well with the sweat. So it needs to be proper plastic in the bags.
So buying wine in Norway is the solution.
Buying wine in Norway and buying 20 bags to put the wine in. I change the vapor barriers about every 5 days.
Okay. Next one is, how did you calculate the daily calorie intake of 4,900 calories?
So during my expeditions, I try to see how much food are myself and the guests actually eating, how does it evolve during the trip, and how does other companies calculate. And then I've tried to learn from that. I've seen that very often people write that the stuff they're bringing have more calories than they actually have, and often people bring way too much. There is often people say the standard is 6,000 for polar expeditions, but in my experience, 6,000 is for when you're skiing solo to the North Pole, hauling 100 kilograms. If you are conscious of weight and what you're bringing, you're doing an expedition like this, we need enough calories to not lose tons of weight. Losing a kilogram or two is not a problem, but then 4,900 on average is what I've seen works quite well. But I always bring extra food so that if during packing some people say they need more, they will be able to bring more. Bringing too much, however, it's such a lot of waste that they try to avoid it.
Did you have the opportunity to step away from the traverse and ski other objectives, or is this very much an A to B type of thing?
We had 33 days to ski the entire traverse, which gives us the average per day of about 18 kilometers. which is quite little in a ski expedition if you compare to Greenland or Antarctica. And the reason for this was so that we could take small detours, evening trips, and visit other places. So we did a few times we were visiting ice caves, and we also visited a lot other glacier phenomenons, and spent some time doing choosing the route that was not the straightest route to the north, but rather the scenic route instead. So it's a trip from A to B, but by adding a lot of days, we were able to see a lot on the way. I don't think Svalbard is the place where you should push very hard, because then you will not be able to enjoy the scenery.
And what was the average weight of the sleds?
The lightest sleds when we started, they weighed about 40 to 45 kilograms, I reckon. I've tried in every single way to save weight. I try to think of this when we are in an expedition together, that this is not my kilogram and your kilogram, but it's kilograms that we have together. And if all 7 manage to save 1 kilogram, then that's 7 kilograms. And by choosing the right tents, the right stoves, stove plates, shovels, all of these small things, it adds up to common equipment being quite light. And by being thorough with the food, how we pack the food, and our personal equipment, what we bring and what we decide to leave behind, we can get the weight quite low in the pulkas. So I would reckon our pulka weight was in the range of 40 to 60 kilograms. We did, however, in the end, below Trinity Hall, the steepest hill, we dug down a resupply that we were going to pick up on the way home from with the snowmobiles. So dirty underwear, garbage, and all of that, we left at the bottom of Trinity Hall, having a very light pulkas for the last week. And then on our way back with the snowmobiles, we picked it up.
So I missed the question, and it was if you used a vapor barrier for your sleep system, and what it was.
So for the down sleeping bag, there's always a little bit of moisture escaping the body. It's warm, moist air that travels outwards in the sleeping bag until it meets the cold temperature from the outside. And where they meet, that warm, moist air will freeze to ice, as in the top layer of the sleeping bag. If it's not dried, this ice will go deeper and deeper into the sleeping bag and create problems with huge lumps of ice, and it will mess up the down insulation. I don't personally like vapor barriers because they are very uncomfortable to sleep in. A better solution is to have a thin Primaloft over bag on top of your down sleeping bag. Then this warm, moist air will leave the down and travel into the Primaloft and freeze to ice in the Primaloft over bag instead. And the Primaloft, a synthetic insulation, ice doesn't affect its insulation effect. So it will be much easier to preserve the down, much easier to dry. So we didn't use any vapor barriers. What we did was we dried the sleeping bags during the day. If I'm doing an expedition earlier in the year where drying sleeping bags is trickier, I will rather go for a bag over that captures the ice instead of a bag inside that captures the moisture.
And how many days did you add as a backup when planning in terms of food and fuel and so on?
So the trip finishes on the 26th of April. If the weather turns very bad on the 26th, we will probably have a forecast And then the most likely thing to happen is that you will be picked up earlier rather than later. So we had food and fuel so that we, with the rationing, could have managed for a few days. There is also in the north of Spitsbergen cabins. So if there would have been an emergency, we could have used those. But we did not have any more food other than the 33 days that we started with. So we started with 33 days of food. The first day we did not eat the full ration, and the last day we did not eat the full ration. So let's say we carried 1.5 days of extra food, and we reached Verlegenuken with about 6 liters of spare fuel.
Okay, thank you. That's all questions for now. If anyone has something they want to ask, now is your chance. We got one. So the vapor barrier feet, how to maintain proper hygiene, rubbing in antibac, for example, minor fungus issue in nails after a 2nd-degree frostbite, and would be concerned here.
Yeah, so what a lot of people do is they bring talcum, like what you use for babies, and they use talcum on their feet when they get into the tent to dry up. If there is issues like that, bringing wet wipes to wash is also an option. But keeping the feet dry during the night normally helps. So by using talcum, by taking off the vapor barrier as soon as you're in the tent, using talcum or washing them or cleaning them with the wet wipe is what I would recommend. Or both, cleaning with the wet wipe and then put in talcum to dry afterwards.
And there is a question in Norwegian om dere ble supplert med noe drivstoff underveis, so if there was any resupplies of fuel underway.
Yeah, there were, and that's one of the things I learned. I did not ask the guests how much warm water they were drinking during the trip, so I calculated for an average based on our previous experience, and then realized that our warm water consumption, both because the guests enjoyed warm water rather than cold, and because it was so cold that everybody used 2 or even 3 or 4 hot water bottles during the night, our fuel consumption was very high. I had a good friend of mine and a guide, Kristoffer Eide, who did another skiing trip in the area, leave 15 liters of fuel for us. It turned out to be fuel we really didn't need, as we managed to stay beneath our average, and the weather warmed up. But it was a fuel that it was nice to have as a backup.
And how strongly does the temperature affect the fuel consumption, and how do you calculate with that?
It affects it quite strongly. Boiling a kettle of 3.5 liters in 25 degrees below zero takes much longer time. A lot more heat disappears because of the cold. Normal fuel consumption places here, like on Svalbard, Greenland, and Antarctica, if we say every evening 1 liter of boiling and 2 liters of lukewarm to warm water per person, the consumption for just the water is about 0.17 to 0.18 per person per day. We calculated 0.35, and we were just below. So the cold air doesn't necessarily affect the fuel consumption that much in terms of energy taken away from the kettle and the heat source, but the cold air affecting us needing more warm water, that is what makes the fuel consumption so much higher.
And another question is, what is your personal take on solo ski trip? I recently was gifted a second tripwire system, and it's tempting to sleep better with that.
Solo skiing on Svalbard, some people do it. I have never skied solo on the island before. Not only is polar bears an issue, but there's a lot of places with crevasses as well. We had a lot of snow and little issues with it on this trip, but I find it will be tricky if you fall into a crevasse, triggering emergency beacon or calling for help. But it's a risk assessment that you have to take yourself, I guess, depending on the trip, where you're going, and what you're doing, and what level of risk one is willing to accept.
And how much liter fuel do you calculate per person for boiling water and using the stove in the tent per day?
So as I said, we calculated the 0.35 for the first 15 days on this trip and 0.30 for the last 18 days. And with the fuel that we got out with Kristoffer Eide, and we also had one guest that had to abort the trip and making the amount of fuel for the 6 that continued more. We weren't that thorough on fuel, so we allowed ourselves to have some more comfort in the evening. However, I think if no matter how much you use your stove, it's hard to use more than 0.4 to 0.45 liters per person per day. That's for 2 people in the same tent. If the stove is running all morning and all evening, it will use about 0.8 liters. That's for a MSR Whisper Light stove.
Thank you. I seem to keep missing some questions, so if I've skipped some or there's any more questions. Okay, now a question of if you can discuss typical groups, so what's the gender and age?
It varies a lot. What I can say is that most of the groups on trips like this are very homogeneous in the terms that they are here with the same expectations. Normally, they are very similar in terms of their physical abilities. On this group, the age varied from 35 to 55. And that I would say is an average 35 to 55. I have, however, both had older and younger people with me on skiing trips. With big spans in age in the groups, one might think that it's a problem, but everybody brings something to the table. Some people bring physical strength, and other people brings mental strength, and it's getting the group to work together. That's an ideal thing on an expedition like this. Happiness and joy is just as important as physical strength.
And did you mention gender?
Yeah, on this trip it was 50-50. 3 guys and 3 girls.
And that's typical for other trips as well, you think?
For international trips, I would say 50-50 is quite typical. For Norwegian guests, in my experience, it tends to be a little bit more ladies than men.
Okay, thank you. So I think that was the last question, unless I missed something or someone else is wondering about anything. How much skiing skills were necessary to have? I'm a snowboarder and I know cross-country skiing, but no alpine skiing. Would that be an issue?
No. There were many people on this group that had very little cross-country skiing experience. If you have some, then we'll work with that. This trip is put up so that the beginnings, it will be a little bit shorter days, focused on getting into the routines and getting to where we want to be in terms of our technique. And the guide, me on this trip, will always look at the technique and try to give feedback and try to tell ways to improve the technique during the trip. Skiing with the pulka and the skins is not as much cross-country skiing as just walking with skis on your feet often. So there are rarely long strides and fantastic glides on the glacier. On the downhill, where balance is important, if there is a very hard and tricky downhill conditions, there's always ways to get down in a safe manner, using a rope underneath the pulka to give it more friction, or in some glacier passes, just unhooking the pulka and sending it down on its own, and then skiing down and picking it up at the bottom.
And can you say a biggest difficulty or challenge to take into account during the trip and as a guide? Do you have any tips or advice?
There's a lot of big challenges. On Svalbard, I would say that the extreme wind is one of the biggest challenges. There is a strong wind on Greenland and in Antarctica as well, but it's often very, very predictable. On Greenland, it's often katabatic winds coming from up on the glacier plateau and down. So the wind direction is also always often predictable. On Svalbard, there will be low pressures, small low pressures hitting the island. So if you are in the wrong place, the wind can change 90 degrees in a few hours. And when it does, with the hurricane prevailing, it's very tricky to manage the situation. There's also big mountains, so it can be wind forecasted from the west, but when it comes, it turns around the mountain and hits from the south instead. So on Svalbard, the big weather is what I would say is one of the challenges. And that's why when there is forecasted wind, I like to be on predictable glaciers, up on glacier plateaus or in the middle of glaciers, where it will be easy to predict where the wind will come from. It will not come around the mountain or down a side glacier, but it will be straight on.
And how much effort do you put into ski maintenance, as in waxing for different conditions and so on?
Before we leave, everybody prepare their skis, the sole of their skis. We do bring some ski wax if it's good conditions, and we also bring some skin, some preparat, skin impregnation, to make sure that if it's warm weather, you can put on the skin and you prevent ice from sticking to it. But other than having a little bit of ski wax in case of good conditions, we're normally skiing most of the trips on skins. And then mohair skins is the preferred skin to get the better glide.
And have you heard anything about tripwire systems not being allowed on commercial trips anymore from next year? If so, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I've heard about it. my personal opinion on the matter, it will take a very long time to go through. There has been incidents of tripwire being put up incorrectly and thus not working. But I hope it will definitely be very much harder to do trips like this if we have to have a wake polar bear guard. And I think it will be equally as dangerous having a wake polar bear guard in extreme cold as having a tripwire. But there is always solutions for problems like this, and I hope that the governor of Svalbard, together with the Norway government, will find a solution so that we can continue doing expeditions like this in the future.
And to what extent do you use satellite imagery for route planning, and how far do you use weather forecasting on the Go forecast through Garmin? Question mark.
I use satellite imagery quite extensively, and not most importantly to look at sea ice conditions when the trip is close, and also to look at the glacier movement, and that's especially important for me in the south. It's the weather forecast from Garmin. I found it's often quite inaccurate on Svalbard, but I get the weather forecast from Rakel, who is the back office, and then what I am looking for in the weather forecast is if it's any low pressures coming in the distance. Normally the weather is quite similar as it was the day before, and that doesn't need to be super accurate for me. But I like to know in advance if there is any low pressure, and it's better that I get information 5 days before than that that it doesn't come, then that I will not get information. So we do use the long-term weather forecast, but Garmin one not that much. Just to go back to the tripwire question a little bit with the governor and the changing laws. The Svalbard Traverse next year will still go ahead as planned, and so there's nothing to worry about for the next year.
Super. Now I think we have gone through all of the questions, and I want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming. It was very fun that so many people wanted to see this presentation. On our website, we'll put up more information about future trips. Please go in and check it out. And if you want to join Svalbard expedition next year, there is still a few available spots. So please contact if there is anything. And I hope you all enjoyed the presentation, and that some of you maybe learned a thing or two. So thank you very much, everybody.